All right. If you're watching this right now, you're probably watching this afterwards. So we always start about 10 or 15 minutes beforehand to make sure that everything's working and all that. So please stand by as I do all the stuff we need to do. Getting all this stuff online. It's riveting, isn't it? It's quite riveting. Sorry about the boring part. How's everyone doing? If you're watching this now live, you can let me know how you're doing. Tell me what you're excited about. Meanwhile, I'm going to get this online here and get it all shared. Katie, can you come over here? Can you come over here? Do you have the computer? Yeah, it's right here. This first part, we always have to set up all the live stuff and link them all so people know where to get, where to go to watch it and all that jazz. So it's kind of boring. So yeah, you can fast forward ahead about 15 minutes and then you'll be in the, or you can watch me do this and talk about random stuff, which is what we usually do. Alrighty. And just one more thing, we gotta get get this posted on Facebook. Oh, I should do my famous hold music. The free music. 10 hours of elevator music. That sounds amazing. Okay, there we go. And now Yeah, 8 minutes before the class starts. We're just setting up the technical stuff. So please stand by. This is what we're drinking today. Get this milk out of here. Looks like it's hot. We have 4 minutes and class starts 4 minutes. All right, we've got about 3 minutes. Hey, what's everyone drinking? You got, this is what we're drinking. We'll talk about it. But it's a bacanora made with anise, actually. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Let us know what you're drinking. 2 minutes. And let us know if there's any sound problems or like any other problems, like digginess or video problems or whatever. Please let us know so we know. Got a better connection since we moved into the bedroom here, so we haven't had any problems in the last couple classes. All right. Good. How's everybody doing? If you're joining us here live, it is 5 o'clock. It is time to begin. It's 4:59. Time to begin. We're today going to be talking about warm season vegetables and herbs. So the stuff you're going to grow in the warmer half of the year, and we're focusing on mostly the annual crops, right? So not fruit trees, and we're not going to talk too much about the perennial herbs. You know, that's a whole other class. Perennial plants in general, kind of a different discussion. Mostly it's going to be the warm season vegetables and herbs, and there'll be a few exceptions. I've threw in a couple perennials in this class, but that are usually grown in gardens like this. And some of our annual crops are actually perennials too, so we just grow them as annuals because they either freeze in the winter or it gets too hot. Well, not in this case, not for the warm season vegetables, but anyway, you get the point. But let's first let's see, start off with the toast. Do you want to toast to anything? Please give us some rain.
Rain.
That's not really a toast. That's a wish.
That's a want.
Who are we happy with and proud of? Oh, you know what? I just found out Chick Corea died. If you are a fan of jazz.
Oh no.
I was trying to tell you, you were sleeping. Chick Corea died. We saw him just a couple years ago. God, was that last year?
No.
It was at least a year and a half ago. Maybe 2 years. Chick Corea died. He had cancer. Fuck cancer.
Fuck cancer.
Cheers. So fuck cancer. Cheers, everybody. Hope you have something nice to drink. We're drinking. Hold on. This is Bacanora, but Anisado. So this is sort of a traditional Bacanora from Sonora that's usually more for festivals. And I think it's some religious festivals and stuff that they use it for.
The women drink it.
Yeah, it's more the women drink it. So sorry, all you toxic men out there who aren't comfortable with your gender. But I'm happy drinking them. A girly drink.
And you can find it at Plaza Liquors.
Yeah, Plaza Liquors is. Yeah, they're the only ones that have it right now. Yeah. So yeah, Plaza Liquors. Borderland Spirits are the people who make it available to us. So thank you, Borderland Spirits, for providing the teachers some libations. Just a quick agenda. We already did the first thing, the toast, but just so you know what to expect in this class, we're going to first talk about general prepping for your garden bed. That sometimes is a whole class. I can teach a whole class on that. I could talk about it forever. So it'll be sort of a quickie version of that, but we'll go over it because there's some people who've never planted a vegetable before, and it's different than planting a landscape plant. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the timing, seasonality of the warm season crops. We'll talk a little bit about just some of the crops that'll be passing out, because you can still plant lettuces and stuff like that. This class isn't on the cool season crops, but we don't want you to think that it's time to stop growing those. It's actually kind of early to start the warm season crops, but a lot of people start them to get ahead, so that especially for things like tomatoes that kind of slow down in the summer. So we'll talk about timing. We'll talk about feeding after that. We'll talk a little bit about container growing, and then we're going to launch into crop profiles, and that is the bulk of this class. We're going to go through each crop and talk about how to grow it, and what you can grow in our warm season in Tucson and surrounding areas. And then at the end, as always, we'll have questions and comments that can be related to the topic or not. But do feel free, if it's on topic, to post any questions as we're going along here. We're keeping an eye on the questions as we go through this. So, and please, if there's any problems with audio or video, let us know. And yeah, so let's get started. This is an actual. These are actual pictures, by the way, of our garden. So you can see the soil we started off with there. Not very good soil, not the worst, but you can see that white part there. That's some of that sun, but some of that is caliche. There was some caliche in our soil, in concrete, and what else did we find? Like
random stuff.
Random stuff. You know, when you're a gardener and you do a lot of digging, you find some weird things over the years. Lots of pet graves, lots of you know, cat skeletons and stuff like that. But
we didn't find any, did we?
No.
Did we?
I may have found some and just been, you know, quickly.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean that's what happens if you dig. I'm actually surprised I haven't found human remains yet. It's bound to happen someday. But anyway, you can see how serious that I got. You don't have to do this. And by the way, so first we're going to talk about growing plants in the ground. We'll talk about container growing too. But I'm going to tell you, if you have the space, growing in the ground is almost always the best. Not everyone has the space. Some people have too many big trees in the way, and some people have not a lot of space. So you may not be able to do this, but for those of you who can grow in the ground, I highly recommend it. But remember that you're going to prepare the soil with much more work than you would do a landscape plant, because domestic edible crops are weird. They're human. You know, it's like you don't raise cattle and chickens like you would do in nature. You do it differently because you're expecting more out of them than nature usually provides. So like we're feeding these plants with a little bit, you know, tomatoes. We want them to fruit a lot, right? And that's an expensive endeavor to go through as an organism. Takes a lot of energy and a lot of nutrients and stuff. So we have to feed a little bit more to get what we want out of those plants. So anyway, in this case, I dug down about 3 feet. Some places there's about 4 beds, 4 plus a couple others on the side, but 4 main beds, 3 to 4 feet deep. Don't go crazy like I did. You don't have to do it that way. I'm insane. So you don't have to do it that way, but you know, at least a foot down would be nice. That's where most vegetable and herb crops, their roots are going to go down about that much. It does help to dig a little deeper, but it's not necessary. Okay, and so I do also realize this is sort of an ableist thing to say, hey, dig a 3 foot deep, you know, trench. So just if you can't do this yourself for whatever reason, see if you can have someone help you do this. You know, hire somebody or get a relative or make your kids do it or whatever. Does anyone else have a history of their parents making them do insane stuff?
As chores?
Yeah, I had to dig a basement once. And I didn't even like my parents. Anyway, moving on. The other thing that I want to know, this is a picture of the bed, you know, 2 of the 4 beds after I had dug them, and I hadn't amended them yet. They're still, at this point, they were just big holes in the ground or trenches. But it had rained. And this is to show you that you also want to grade your landscape such that the water, when it rains, goes to where the plants are. And that's exactly where our water goes when it rains. It floods the beds really nice. So they're lower. And that's a thing, by the way, even when this is filled up and stuff, the beds are going to be lower than the normal grade of your soil. That's the opposite of what they tell you to do in other parts of the country. Because they're different. We're a desert. We have a lot of reasons why we go down. We go down. We don't go up, usually. Oh, one more just major statement at the beginning of all this. There's always your own way of doing things, and we're going to show you what we do and what we suggest. There are different ways of doing things, and feel free to break the rules. I've had people do stuff that I would have thought was wrong, like a friend of mine. The story I always tell is a friend of mine who started gardening and didn't know all the rules, planted radishes in July once, and got beautiful radishes. Radishes are usually a winter crop, but they are also fast growing, and they can produce a tuber, pretty quick. So you can actually grow radishes in the summer. They have this. They stand a bigger chance to bolt, which means go to flower. But anyway, he grew these beautiful radishes, and they tasted great, and there was nothing wrong with them. So feel free to break the rules. These are just guidelines. There are reasons for these guidelines, and they are usually the correct way to do things. But there's other ways to do things. We do believe strongly in the organic thing, especially if you're going to eat it and feed this to your family. But you should always be organic. I mean, if you're not going to put that in your mouth, why are you going to put it in a bird's mouth? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, moving on. So here are there's a third bed being made there. Actually, even a little bit of the fourth is being dug there too. But those first two beds in this picture have been amended with compost. In this case, we also had some spent grain, some extra spent grain from Borderlands Brewery. We were feeding our chickens with it, but we had a lot of extra. So we were also composting it and putting it in our beds. And it was a nice ingredient to put in because it's very acidic. And in our soils, acidic is a good thing because our soils and our water are alkaline. But you can see here, this is just the very beginning. We plucked a few things in the ground, but this isn't a serious garden yet. But we were just getting stuff prepped. And then, of course, after you've amended the soil, and so by the way, what do you put in here, right? And what ratio? Compost is the best thing to put in. If it's your own compost that you made yourself, and again, that's another class, but and by the way, there's if you go under plant info on our website, there's a whole page on regular thermal composting, aerobic thermal composting, which is regular composting. There's a whole article on that if you want to check that out. Don't do that now though, because you're listening to me talking. And so anyway, compost that you make yourself is always better than anything store-bought. Not everybody has the ability or the time or the space to make compost, but if you can, do it because it's the best thing to do. So you can get some compost from anywhere that you can find compost, and most compost, any of it's going to be fine. And if you got if you have a source of aged manure, that would be really good to add in here too. And then maybe some organic foods, like a general purpose. If you got some bat guano, if you've got some, whatever you got. Worm castings. Yeah, worm castings are great. Usually the more the better for a lot of our crops. There are some crops that need less nutrition, and we'll talk about that. So after, you can see here that this bed has been amended, and there's irrigation installed too, and have a plan for watering. And if you can, don't trust humans, trust robots, because and when I say robots, I mean like timers. And get that on a timer. You can pick one up from Ace Hardware, and they run on batteries, and they hook up right up to your hose bib. And you get a splitter on your hose bib so you can still have a hose, but and then from there on, it's just tinker toys, man. It's really easy to put together. The brown tubes there have a hole every foot or so, and so it's like a drip, but in a long tube. And by the way, this is great stuff if you are dealing with animals that love to pull out the spaghettis in landscaping, because this is a big tube instead of a tiny little spaghettis. So, not as easy for the wildlife to mess with. But this is what we do in our backyard, and that's our irrigation system. Now, here's what the cool season crops are like. There's lettuce in there. There's some, I think those are shallots. There's kale. But even in this messy picture, you can see that they're in rows and they're tidy. And that's what cool season crops are tidy. They're usually, most crops take up about a foot of a footprint. And they're very predictable where they're going to go, right? The warm season crops are not tidy. They sprawl around. They're big and viney and bushy, and because most of our warm season crops, and these are tendencies, not every single crop is this way, but most warm season crops are untidy, and that's a lot of them. It's because you're eating the fruits, not the plant, right? So with the lettuce, you're eating the whole plant. You're eating the whole thing. This foot wide romaine lettuce that you grew, you eat the whole thing. But on a tomato, we'll talk about that too. You can actually eat the whole thing, but dun dun dun. But most of the time, people are growing for the fruit, right? So you have this big plant, and then there's fruits. And so, yeah, there are different types of crops that we generally grow in the warm season. In this picture, this is a picture in July. And I remember this is one of our best crops that we had in our yard. And we had even large tomatoes producing in the summer. It was the Genovese, those large ribbed tomatoes. It was producing like crazy, and other tomatoes too. Can't remember all the ones we had, but not always does the summer stop your tomatoes from fruiting. Why did ours do so well? It was a fresh bed, so there was lots of nutrients, particularly phosphorus and magnesium were strong, so we had strong fruiting. Magnesium is actually one of those magical nutrients that'll help you in the summertime. But it was a fresh bed, so we had a really great crop that year. We grew squash. You can see the Three Sisters garden in the background there. We had corn, we had beans in there. I think we had with dragon's tongue. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
That cool, yeah, dragon's tongue, I think. So anyway, but the general point here is that like we could barely walk in that garden. This is, by the way, those same 3 beds that you saw the picture of. And I think by this time the 4th bed is in there. We're looking at the first 2 beds and the facade of the 3rd bed. And you can see we had a lot of plants in there. Three Sisters Garden, I just mentioned it, but if you don't know what it is, it's very traditional. It comes from indigenous traditions. Corn, beans, and squash are the typical plant. You plant the corn kind of shades the squash a little bit, which the squash doesn't mind. And the beans kind of grow all around, usually up the corn, but sometimes just kind of wherever they go. And the beans are giving squash and corn like a lot of nitrogen as well as phosphorus, but so that they get an extra boost of nitrogen because of the beans. They're a great pairing. You can sometimes switch out some of these things. Just think about what you're doing. You can use any legume crop to be the bean. Obviously, beans are beans, right? But instead of using corn, you could do sunflowers, or you could do those tall growing amaranths. You can switch those out in the Three Sisters garden. And likewise on the ground, it doesn't have to be squash. It could be watermelon. It could be cantaloupe. It could be any of those cucurbit, low growing, but still somewhat sprawling fruiting things. Yeah. One way to manage. Oh, so let's back up here a little bit. You can tell here this year we didn't do any sort of staking at all. We were lazy. We just let things go wherever they wanted to. But if you're smart and you can do it ahead of time, you can stake up. And this is what we do now. We stake things up. And we do various methods. This method here is sort of like that A-frame method, which is all right. I think the preferred method for us now is using a string, because we have a frame over our garden now, which we now will cast a 30% shade cloth over the top during the summer. We didn't used to shade our garden at all, and you don't have to. Surprise, right? But the vegetable garden really doesn't need any shade, but a little bit of shade makes it a little easier. But just don't do much more than 30 or 40%, because the more shade you have, the more you'll have insect issues. Like the aphids can be more problematic when the plants are a little bit more tender and etiolated. And you also will have less fruit. So we only just barely cast some shade over the top, and that's it. But because of the frame we have over the garden, we can now use that frame to tie our tomatoes up. So we have a string that comes down, and then we tie it and train the tomato to go up. So in this picture, these tomatoes are heavily pruned to push that fruiting. I have mixed feelings about this method. Sometimes it seems like it works really well, but other times it seems like it's actually taking energy away from the plant, because every time you remove leaves, you're also removing engines, right? So you don't have to trim them, and that's this much, but staking them up, of course, is great. You should know about you see this on seed packets. It'll say 55 days or 70 days. What does this mean? It's the time it takes for each crop to develop from a germinated seed to mature usable size, right? In the case of the lettuce, you eat the whole thing, so it's when the lettuce is big enough to eat. In the case of the tomato, it's when it's big enough to start fruiting. So this is important because some varieties of some crops take a lot longer, and if you don't plant them in time, they won't be of size before it's too late. In the case of the tomato, if you're trying to grow those nice big beefsteak tomatoes, you can grow those here, but a lot of people will tell you can't. But you just have to get an early start, because they take like anywhere from 45 to 90 days, I think, depending on which beefsteak. So you just have to, plant them in time so that you get enough fruits. But that's what that means. So now, of course, you're not looking at the seed packets, but you should ask well, you can always look this up, even if you're nursery, if you buy your stuff at Home Depot, and I don't suggest that you do because they spray everything, but they're not going to know. But even some nurseries may not know what the timing is of each crop, and it's not because they're not good at their job. I have to look it up. I can't remember every single heirloom variety and how many days it takes. Like, that's insane. I was just talking to Katie earlier about all this, and being a good gardener isn't knowing everything. It's knowing where to look for the information. So we're good at that. We're good at knowing where the information is. We don't remember everything. I have to look up stuff all the time, but you can too. So if you see a celebrity tomato, you can Google celebrity tomato on Google and find one of the various seed companies that sells that variety, and they'll have, if they're a good seed company, they will have the days on there. So that's important. Getting a head start. These are very elaborate ways of getting started. There's some row crops there. Cloth is better than plastic. So when you're starting a warm season crop, they're frost tender usually. and that's why you typically would wait till later, later in February, or some people wait till April. But these are light frosts that we're protecting our plants from. So to get an early start, you can just simply cover your plant. Cloth works better because it doesn't conduct cold as much as plastic. At least that's what they always told us. I question a lot of things now because so many myths have been blown over the years. But anyway, plastic or cloth is good. A frame, if you can, a frame to hold it, the plastic or the cloth away from the plant. So, because wherever it touches the plant, especially plastic, tends to you'll burn the plant wherever the plastic is touching. And cloth too. Actually, when the cloth gets wet from the dew and then it freezes, that'll get the plant too. It'll only get the edges, but it'll still be a problem. Now, of course, if you're planting some tomatoes now, they're small. And if they're small, that means that you don't need to do something so elaborate. You can just cover it up with a jar or a nursery container or any of these methods. Take it off during the day because, in some climates you could just leave them on all day because it's not as hot, but we're, hot and getting hotter. So, when it warms up to 80 degrees and you're planting that little jar, it might be a little rough on it. So, take it off during the day, and you only have to cover it on the cold nights when it gets below 40. Some of your little seedlings, if it gets into the low 40s during the morning or during the afternoon, or sometimes even in the morning, they'll kind of look wilty. Don't panic if that happens. If anything, it kind of toughens the plant up a little bit. But that is it's just the plant, when the plant gets a little cold, it just can't stay turgid, from the fluids moving through the tissues. And so they just kind of go, and sometimes it looks terrible, like they haven't been watered. And it may not even happen, but if that does happen, that's in the low 40s, that'll happen to tomatoes or peppers. Don't panic, it'll be fine. They'll come right. In fact, it only lasts usually like an hour or something like that. So just be aware of that. But anyway, yeah, cover your plants. Organic fertilizers. Now, some people go crazy over this stuff, and some of it's kind of fun, to be honest. I love getting into ingredients, particularly if you can find ingredients that are making use of a waste product. That's a fantastic thing. Ideal, not always possible. But when you feed your garden, it's not just in the beginning. You want to feed it throughout the season. We tend to use a lot of fish fertilizer because it can be fish fertilizer and kelp, because they give you just a little bit of nutrients that you need, and then a lot of micronutrients. And also because kelp and fish fertilizer are easily dissolved in water, and you can access plants that are a little bit harder to access the soil, particularly container plants, by the way, because it's just a little easier. The Epsom salt there, that's a magnesium sulfate, and that's the little magic ingredient that you can add into your garden. Just about a teaspoon per quart, I think is what it is. It's not an exact science. You can Google it. You can find, you'll find slightly different suggestions, but they're all about the same. Mix it in water and feed your plants. And actually, you can do a foliar spray of magnesium sulfate too, because it's a readily available ionic mineral. So that means ionic just means that the plants can take it in through their leaves. So nice to know. It's one of those nutrients that really helps with flowering in combination with phosphorus. And so, it really helps those tomatoes keep flowering and fruiting if you want to keep them fruiting in the hot season. Obviously, I said add fresh compost, and you can do this after you've planted too. What we sometimes do is put especially if our crops are in rows, aren't always in the summer, but adding compost kind of in between the crops. And of course, it'll add nutrition to the soil. It also helps with the mulching, which we'll talk about too. So yeah, compost. Rotate your crops. Don't grow the same thing in the same spot every year. Remember what you grew in that spot beforehand, right? And the reason you do this is, certain related crops tend to have, related problems. And so, and also, when you grow legumes in the ground, let me see, did I put a thing in here? Yes, I sure did. Okay, so, well, let's go to this. So here are some examples of crops that like crappy soil. If your soil's on the crappy side, let's say this winter you grew a lot of broccoli. Broccoli is a nutrient heavy plant. I mean, it uses a lot of nutrients. And so it's that plot of the soil is going to be a little bit depleted. And let's say you don't want to do a whole bunch of you don't want to spend a ton of money on organic fertilizer. Plant a legume crop because they don't need that richness so much. They still need a little phosphorus, and so do root crops. But yeah, so in the summertime you grow legumes. Grow a legume. That's a yard long bean on the right there. Really cool crop. Grow any of those beans that you grow in the summer, which we'll talk about. Root crops, you don't want to follow those up after a legume, or you don't want to plant them with the legumes because they don't want a lot of nitrogen. Because root crops, they like kind of crappy soil, but they do need phosphorus. And if you have a soil that's super rich and very nitrogen-y, then you'll get a lot of green, but you won't get any root. You'll have these beautiful tops for your carrots, and then you pull them out of the ground and there's no swollen roots. That's too much nitrogen. So rotating your crops and knowing what your crops need is a really super important thing to do. But don't grow tomatoes in the same place you did every year. Or if you do, really do a good job on amending that soil. And let's talk about container growing. So some of y'all are going to be not having access to a plot of land. So you'll be growing in a container. Container growing, you'll follow most of the same rules that you do for gardening, except for a couple of things. One, you'll probably use potting soil instead of native soil. That's probably a better idea. And you still will put in manures and compost and stuff like that and mix that up. You want it to be rich still, unless you're growing root crops or legumes. And the bigger the container, the better. Just remember that you'll have to feed more often in a container. Plants don't love containers. It's a harder situation for them because they heat up quicker, especially in the summer. They dry out faster. Also, salts build up weird in a container, right? Because wherever water stops, salts build up. And in a soil profile, if you're watering correctly, you're pushing those salts past the root zone. But in a container, those salts are going to stop at the edges of the pot. And you've seen this probably when you pull out, when you pull out a plant out of a pot and you have that black plastic pot, you see the salt buildup. That's where the salt ended up. So those are always some issues. Thorough watering, especially every once in a while to flush out salts, but for the same reason, you will be feeding more often. Okay. So, and also you're still going to have to, do the same planning, selecting the right kind of crops that are going to do well in a container, just practically, right? If you don't have a place to put vining things, don't plant vining things because you're going to need to stake them up or something, right? Let's start off with the profiles. We're going to go through the plants, and we've organized them by family because we want you to know botany, and also it'll help you because then you won't have to learn the same thing over and over again for every crop because families have some similar traits, right? We have crazy cats running around here. The tomato. Maybe some of you saw some of our posts recently. We've been selling tomatoes. If you're planting them now, you'll protect them. They are a nightshade. There's a lot of we talked about a lot of history in our some of our social media posts. If you missed it, what we basically said was, tomato is a new world crop, which some people don't know. Potatoes are too, by the way. So that means that they're new to Europe. And I love the little bit of information we were giving out this week, including the history of Italy and the tomato, where the tomato was not a traditional food for Italy at all. In fact, most people despise tomatoes were kind of a maligned plant unless you just grew it as an ornamental, but people thought it was dangerous because nightshades across the world are dangerous and poisonous, but tomatoes are not. And it's because we stole it from I'm of European descent, but I'm not European. But Europeans are colonialist countries, and they stole things from indigenous cultures and brought it to their country, and they didn't know anything about it. And the history is interesting because, like, if you go to if you read the histories, it was about 1520s when the Spanish got there, and there was some ethnobotanists who are talking about there was almost always an ethnobotanist with these conquistadors and missionaries and all that, and they would write about the plants. And so a botanist mentioned that there were these, he was talking about the tomato, the tomate, which is tomato in Nahuatl language, and he said there were mind-boggling variety of tomatoes back then. So long before Europeans ever got involved, we like to take credit for creating new varieties of things, and we do a lot of breeding as Europeans or whatever. But there was so many varieties, long before we even started growing this thing, and we still haven't harnessed the flavors of the tomato in the same way that the indigenous cultures have. And if you really want to learn how to harness those flavors, read cookbooks from tropical American countries. So like Mexico, especially, in South America. South America is where the tomato is native. And learn what they're doing, and then you'll find out things like that the foliage of tomatoes are not poisonous, and neither are peppers or eggplant. They're edible. You got to cook them, but they're edible, and they're even kind of interesting and delicious. Let's not forget to watch the electricity. Yeah, I just remembered that. So anyway, the tomato, it's a heavy feeder, so it loves food. So feed it, and it loves sun. It's the sun is not the issue in the summer, it's the heat. Remember that. So shading your tomato isn't going to make it all that much better when it comes to that flowering fruiting issue. What does help? Mulching, feeding, consistent watering. Those are important things. And of course, remember to cage them up. Here's a particular problem to nightshades. While we're on the subject of nightshades, blossom end rot. If you've seen this, it means one of a number of things. The main thing is probably the nutrient quality of your soil isn't that great. You probably this usually shows up after your first garden is probably really great and you have this really great crop, and then your next season, and then you start to see stuff like this. And that's because there's lacking of phosphorus. Also, when the soil isn't prepared very well and the watering is inconsistent, that can also contribute to this problem. Mulching your plants with some straw in the in the top layers of the soil, and you can actually tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, nightshades in general, you can actually bury deeper than other plants. Do not do this with other plants. That kills most plants. When you plant a plant, usually, especially landscape plants, you want that root ball to be level with the soil. You want it to show. Don't bury the base of the plant. But I'm going to tell you, and I'm always telling people this because it's a big problem, but you can break that rule with this. The eggplants and tomatoes and peppers, they're nightshades, and nightshades can re-root out of the base. So you can plant them actually kind of pretty deep. You can actually, snip off the lower stems, about this much, and really bury it deep. And as the season goes on, you can mound up more mulch at the base of the plant. The mulch will help protect the roots. It'll keep the water from evaporating too much, and the plants will re-root. So that's kind of cool. It's a nice little extra little thing you get with those nightshades. Peppers. Peppers. There's 5 species of peppers. I'm not going to do this with every crop, by the way, but I'm going to get into peppers because they're cool. They're going to be a lot like the tomatoes. They want the richer part of the garden, especially magnesium and phosphorus. Don't forget to wash your hands if you've been picking them. I've done it many times, and gone to the bathroom or touched my eye. I have this weird thing though that I kind of like the feeling too. I like the heat feeling because that's how much I love peppers. I love pain, I guess. But anyway, be careful, especially if you're handling ghost peppers or something. But there's 5 species of peppers, and let's run through them real quick. Capsicum annuum is the most common one you will find, and most of the peppers are probably this. Most of the ones that we grow in most gardens are Capsicum annuum. The chiltepin is a Capsicum annuum. All the typical peppers that we grow for Southwestern food, like hatch chilies and those types of peppers are all Capsicum annuum. Shishitos, serranos, peperoncini, padron, those are all Capsicum annuum. And these are most of the peppers that we know. Capsicum chinense is another species, and the habanero falls into this category. By the way, let's back that up. Capsicum annuum, both sweet and hot peppers, right? So the bell pepper is Capsicum annuum as well. Just want to make sure that no one thought that there were only hot peppers or something. The Scotch bonnet or habanero, boot jolokia, or ghost pepper, that's kind of the same thing, and the red savina, they all kind of have that similar shape or somewhat similar shape. The habanero is a little different, but similar. This is all Capsicum chinense, and so that's that species. There's Capsicum frutescens, and this is mostly the Thai peppers. If you've ever grown those Thai peppers, Thai chilies, that is Capsicum frutescens. Capsicum baccatum is just a kind of a weird group of chilies, and they're hot mostly. The ají amarillo and ají panca are the most common ones that you would probably know. Capsicum, I messed up some. Oh, they all say baccatum now. Okay, that's not baccatum. That is. Oh no, I have to look that up. See, I don't know everything. I get them mixed up. This is another group of peppers, and I'm gonna have to think real hard on this one because the name's not coming up. But this pepper, these are the balloon peppers, if you've seen those before. And they're super fun to grow. A lot of them have this star shape or starfish type shape. and then there's this one is the weirdest one. I think this is pubescens, capsicum pubescens. And pubescens is the Mexican manzano pepper. It's the most weird. Oh, the rocoto as well. This one looks different too, in that its foliage is a different color. The plant just looks different. So sorry about those wrong titles up here, but that's the capsicum pubescens. And this is the rarest one. Eggplants. So eggplant is a much more diverse fruit than most people know. We mostly know what is that purple one that everyone grows?
Black beauty.
The black beauty. That's the one you see, and maybe you see some of those Japanese eggplants in the grocery store. But there's so many weird eggplants, and they're all really cool, and they all have their uses. And if you think you don't like eggplants because you probably ate that mushy eggplant parmesan, that's especially if it's not cooked right. There are eggplants that when they're roasted and cooked, and they taste almost like candy. They're so good. So, and also maybe you just haven't used eggplant in the right way too. There's so many great dishes from Africa that really know how to utilize the eggplant. So play around with your food, and this is all about food, right? If you're growing all these vegetables, you're growing them to eat them. And at the end of these profiles, I do want to go over some books too. I meant to do that. But anyway, just learn how to cook, get into food, and learn how to make stuff. If you think you don't like something, you're probably making it wrong, because things are good. All right, tomatillo. Tomatillos are a cool crop. They're kind of weird in that they do need nutrition, but sometimes they just really thrive on the edge of the garden for some reason. And I'm not totally sure why. Some people think it's because they like less nutrition, and that's actually not true. But they do seem to like at least to start growing in the edges of the garden, and maybe the roots are getting into the rich part. Do try to plant more than one. You're going to have much better fruiting if you do that, because they, unlike the eggplants and peppers and tomatoes, those guys are not so dependent on on another plant, but at least have 2 or 3 individual plants in the garden of the tomatillo if you want to have fruits, because they do better with cross-pollination. And they're kind of gangly plants, just like tomatoes. Maybe not quite as viney and big. Sometimes they are, though. But yeah, you have a plan for staking them up and all that. The wonderberry, or chichicalite. I used to know how to say that. So these are plants that come up in the garden, and people freak out because they think it's poisonous, because it's a nightshade, and Europeans are terrified of nightshades. This is not poisonous. It's edible and delicious, and it makes great preserves. The greens are edible too when cooked. Don't eat them raw. Yeah, and the reason we have a lot in Tucson is Native Seed Search has really been good at making them out, providing them plants and seeds, and they've gotten out there and they get into the garden, and then they come up every year. You'll have volunteers, and so even if you've never planted this in your garden, they sometimes come up because whoever lived where you are at before you was probably growing it. So yeah, we get this question a lot. People say, this came up, is this poisonous? And so yeah. Cape gooseberry is very similar to the tomatillo. It's a physalis, just like the tomatillo is, and and it also does better if you have more than one. But it's very unique in that it's very sweet. And I don't mean like a sweet tomato. I mean, it's sweet like a fruit. So, well, all these are fruits, right? But this is a very sweet fruit, and it's delicious. This is a fun crop to grow, and you can make preserves out of them. Super delicious. Tobacco is a nightshade, and you may grow this either because you like to smoke, or some people like to experiment with cuisine and make like tobacco syrups and stuff like that for cocktails or whatever. It's also just a cool plant to grow because it's a great pollinator plant, and great plant for historical and religious uses as well. Um, so yeah, the tobacco on all these. Basically, I'm running through these pretty quick, and I'm not going through all the nutritional stuff because they're pretty much the same. They like rich soil. They like a good amount of phosphorus and magnesium. All these nightshades are pretty similar in that way. Um, Also, don't forget we have some native tobaccos and introduced that may come up in your yard. That little white one on the lower left-hand corner is the true native one that we have, Nicotiana trigonophylla. And then the other two pictures are the same species. That's Nicotiana glauca. That one's actually from Mexico and has been introduced, but it's not a particularly bad problem. It's kind of weedy in urban areas, and in disturbed soils, it can turn into just about a tree. They do call it tree tobacco. But man, the hummingbirds love this. I wouldn't try smoking any of this stuff. It's from what I hear, just pretty harsh. Even regular tobacco, you have to ferment it and stuff like that. So unless you know how to do all that, I would probably not try to smoke it. Potatoes. This is also a nightshade, and also New World. Can you imagine the Irish without potatoes? It's kind of amazing that this is new to Europeans, but it's an old world crop, and the variety in South America especially of potatoes is mind-boggling compared to what we usually see. You might see some fingerling potatoes, or you might see, there's red potatoes or russets. We got a little bit of variety, but it's like 5 or 4 varieties. Can you think of more? Sweet potato isn't one of these, by the way. Not even in the same family. We'll get to that one. But potatoes just have a mind-boggling variety. A lot of them are a lot of the ones that are in South America are small. They're not, very few of them are really big, like the russet. But there's a lot of really delicious small little tomatoes, and they're fun and easy to grow if you can get a hold of some potatoes. And if you're going to grow these, you just kind of cut them up into pieces. You've seen them sprouting if you hadn't gotten to them in time. When you see them like that, if they're small, you can just, like the fingerlings, you could just bury them. But if they're the bigger russets or whatever, cut them up into individual plants, for each sprout, and then plant it. Really easy to grow. And we don't have that problem with rot like they do in other places where if they don't use a little sulfur or something. We don't really have that problem. But yeah, easy to grow. And they're one of those plants that, we were talking about the nightshades you can bury deeper. You can also keep burying them deeper. And there's various methods of doing this. I've seen potatoes planted in stacks of tires. So they put one tire and start growing a potato. And as it gets bigger and bigger, they put another tire on top and then bury that plant a little bit deeper with a mix of dirt and straw, and keep doing that. And the potatoes will just keep rooting out, but they also keep producing tubers all the way up. And so that's what's happening in that top right-hand corner. They're using more of a bamboo covering there, or on the right-hand side, they're just mounding soil up against them. So that's kind of a cool thing to do. You can, make them go vertical and actually get more of the thing you're looking for, the roots. This is a great plant. I don't, I'm sorry if I know I can move the video with me in it for me, but I don't think I can for you. So this is called Narania. We grew this once when we were living in a condo, actually. You remember that?
I don't remember this.
Yeah, we grew this. And it's super, super cool. It has purple spikes that come out of the veins, and it's just one of those fruiting. There's a lot of fruiting nightshades that are edible around, especially in the New World. And so this is just one of them. This crop needs a good amount of time. You want to start it as early as possible, protect it from the frost. It's a perennial if you can keep it alive in the winter, either by greenhouse or just like careful covering and all that. The leaves are really big. You do have to water this plant a lot. Let's see here. What's going on? Okay, there we go. Sweet potatoes. So we are now out of the Solanaceae, the nightshades. And there's only really one plant, I think, in this class anyway, that's in the morning glory family, Convolvulaceae. So this is a morning glory, actually. And sweet potatoes are very fast growing tropical plants. They're perennials. There's actually a sweet potato that's grown in as a horticultural plant, and you see them in pots like spilling out. those particular horticultural varieties are not the greatest at producing tubers, and some of them I don't think produce tubers at all. But the leaves are still edible, and that's one of the things about the warm season is you don't have a lot of greens. Lettuces bolt, cabbages bolt. You may be able to get a kale to live through summer, but it doesn't look good. Same with Swiss chard. You can get a Swiss chard to grow into summer, but it don't look good. And it's not really something you really maybe want to eat that much. Once the fall hits and those plants are still alive, they might bounce back and look good again. We have some Swiss chard from, like maybe even more than a year ago.
Yeah.
I think almost 2 years ago. It's an aquaponic system, but it didn't look good in summer. We didn't want to eat it. So anyway, the point is there's not a lot of greens, the salad greens. But there are, in the summer, there are a lot of plants that you can eat the leaves of, and sweet potatoes is one of them. And again, when you grow, this is going to be the same. I'm going to say the same thing over and over again. When you grow crops, you have so many more things you get to play with as a chef or as a cook than if you're only depending on what you can buy. Because in the grocery store, most vegetables are bred to be shelf stable. So that means that's why you only have like 1 or 2 eggplants, and that's why you only have like maybe 5 tomatoes, because they have to last long on a shelf, and that's not really a quality that that makes flavor, right? So if you're really a foodie, if you really love food, and then someone says that Nicotiana glauca is from Argentina, not Mexico. Correct. So what was I just saying? If you're really into food, really learn how to grow your own, because you'll have so many more varieties available to you, and that includes sweet potatoes. Now with sweet potatoes, you can grow them yourself, but you don't necessarily just want to plant the tubers. The best thing to actually do is to make what they call slips, and this is actually how you'll buy them. If you don't buy seeds really. When you buy sweet potatoes, they ship you slips, which is on the right hand side there. That's what slips look like when you get them in the mail. They're rooted cuttings. Then they came off the tubers, and you can do this at home too. You can take those little things that are growing off the tuber and snip them off with a nice razor blade or something, and then put them in a cup of water in a nice bright place and let them set out roots, and then you go plant them. And when you first plant them outside, they're going to be a little tender. Take good care of them, keep them well watered. These guys really like water, and then once they take off, they really take off. It's a heavy feeder. It definitely loves food, but they really take off and grow. Any root crop, you got to emphasize phosphorus, because phosphorus is that's what makes roots. So and that's also something that in our Arizona soils gets depleted quicker than anything else. Well, maybe not quicker than nitrogen, but it gets ignored a lot, because nitrogen's a lot easier to get into the ground. Manure has a lot of nitrogen, and that's a lot of what we use to fertilize with. And phosphorus gets locked up too by our alkalinity. So think about phosphorus when you're growing root crops, any root crops. Let's talk about the cucurbits, the whole family of the Cucurbitaceae. The cucumber, again, mind-boggling number of cucumbers out there, and they're not all. We're going to talk about another related crop that's basically a cucumber, but it's a completely different genus. But you know, and then Armenian cucumber is also not really a cucumber. It's actually a squash, I think. Is it squash, or is it a
It's a melon, isn't it?
it's maybe a melon. Yeah, maybe. Oh, it's a muskmelon. Anyway, I've grown all of these. Probably my favorite thing to grow every year, and I didn't grow it last year, but almost every year I do, is that one that looks like a potato. That's the Sikkim cucumber, Sikkim, I believe. Really cool, cool looking and delicious and easy to grow, really prolific. It loves hot summer weather. That's a fun one to try. I've gotten my seeds from not territorial, what's it called? The weird.
Not Baker's Creek.
Yeah, Baker's Creek. That's it. That's where I got my seed from. Yeah. So anyway, cucumbers are, of course, they like a lot of phosphorus. Basically, a lot of these crops where you're growing them for the fruit, you're definitely going to want a lot of phosphorus. But these also just like a good amount of all the nutrients. This one can benefit from a little bit of shading, more so than the other plants that we've been talking about, because their leaves are not really the greatest for dealing with our summer heat. But they'll just look wilty sometimes during the hottest part of the summer days when it's like triple digits out, and then they usually bounce back in the evening. Just keep these plants evenly watered, and make sure you have phosphorus. They're all vines. I don't think there's any determinate cucumbers. Now, with tomatoes, I forgot to put a slide in there for this, but with tomatoes, there's determinate and indeterminate. Determinate means that they are they're plants that are not going to be viney. Determinate, right? Not indeterminate. If you know English, indeterminate means that it just keeps on going. So all cucumbers are indeterminate, and I believe, I don't think there's any shrubby ones that I can think of.
There might be one now.
There might be one.
You might have bred one to be a shrubby.
Some weird white dude's working on it. But anyway, cucumbers are pretty fun to grow, and fun to preserve. I love making pickles. Oh, there's another fun one that my picture's in the way of. Oh, I guess it's not. That little, by the video there, that little yellow round one is a I think they call it melon cucumber or something like that.
Isn't it lemon cucumber?
Lemon cucumber, yeah, Korean lemon cucumber. It's a Korean crop, and that's an easy one to grow and very prolific too. this is the plant I was talking about. That's kind of like a cucumber, but there's two basic types. I really like that weird little one with the hairy balls one, because I like plants that look like hairy balls. This is just a cool plant, and it's got its own flavor. It's definitely a very South American crop that you'd never see in the U.S. You can get seeds. I've seen seeds for sale on eBay and maybe just eBay. Maybe Baker's Creek has sold these before. Usually it's the fat baby variety that's available, but the lady slippers, that longer one, let's see, I'm looking at that. Yeah, the longer one in that picture there. I was making sure my video wasn't in the way. That is the lady slipper one, and the other one's called fat baby. I don't know why. Maybe because it looks like a baby head. Maybe. Anyway, and like a lot of cucurbits, the greens are edible. Greens are edible on this guy too, by the way, if I didn't say that. And all cucurbits, I think, have edible greens. By the way, that's something that a lot of cultures, and not us, do. Even in, like, developed countries where they have, giant markets and stuff. Japan and China and all through Asia, you can find all these greens, cucumber greens and squash greens and pea tips and all these greens that we never get in the U.S. You can find in markets in the rest of the world. I don't know what it is about the U.S. We just don't do that, I guess. Or maybe we just eat too much chicken nuggets. But anyway, and especially since if you're a gardener and you really like greens, there's so many greens you can get on these warm season crops if you learn how to eat them. I mean, it's not going to be like eating a salad green. You got to cook them. Squash is a huge subject. Some of these crops, like, you could teach a whole class on, and squash is definitely one of those crops. But let's just get one thing out of the way for some of the beginners. Some people have confused the names and think that it means season. So they think that summer squash is something you grow in the summer, and winter squash is something you grow in the winter. And I've even had people tell me, like, well, I did grow winter squash in the winter once, and it grew. And yeah, and I love it. Break the rules. But in general, these are tropical crops, right? They come from the tropics, and the frost is going to get them. And if you happen to live in a warm part of town, you could probably get away with planting a winter squash in winter and getting something out of it. But in general, no. The reason that they call them winter squash is that the fruits are, they store, so that they last into winter. Summer squash is more of a tender, fleshy squash, and it doesn't last that long. You have to refrigerate it, and so that's why they call it summer squash and winter squash, not because you grow it in the winter or summer. And then there's some weirdos, like down at the Tropicino down on the bottom right there. It's like, it looks like a horn that's been cut up into pieces there. That is, and this is true about many of the squashes, but this one's probably the best heirloom variety for this. When it's young and green, you can use it as a summer squash, and it's got a great texture, more like an artichoke than a it's less mushy than the summer squash can sometimes be. Really great Italian variety, Tropicino. And then if you let it stay in the vine, it turns into something a lot more akin to it's a winter squash, and it can store. So squashes, again, nice rich garden soil. There are some varieties, especially the Tohono O'odham varieties, that can take some abuse. and grow in soils that are not so rich. Those are worth looking out for. Native Seed Search has them. But yeah, the squashes generally want a good amount of nutrients. They also get kind of beat up by the sun, and that's one of the reasons you want to grow something tall around it, like when you do Three Sisters gardens, like corn or amaranth or something, or sunflowers. Sunflowers are great. Oh yeah, so this is a slide showing you the difference. There's another difference between the summer squash and the winter squash. That is how they grow most of the time. The plant on the right is a summer squash, and that's kind of how it grows. It doesn't vine really. It grows. It keeps growing upward, and then eventually kaputs. But it's a little bit more of a tidy plant because it doesn't vine. The winter squash on the top left-hand corner is a vining plant. It vines all over the place. And so that's another major difference is how they grow. They still take up quite a bit. The summer squash still takes up quite a bit of room, even though it's not a vine. They are kind of big plants. And there's that Tropicino again as a example of something that's kind of both. But here's something that you might come across with the squashes, especially the summer squashes, is the squash vine borer, which is actually a beautiful moth. That looks like it's not a moth, but it is. See how the antennas are sort of more complex. They're not just thin, they're branched. That's a moth. It's obviously mimicking a wasp or something there, but but that is a moth. And so what you'll see is your plant will look really wilty, and sometimes they look this way anyway, but often it's because the squash vine borer is eaten away in there. And if you can find it, you can get in there and cut it out. Or if you're like me, you'll leave it. Oh my God, I told you to leave a squash vine borer in your squash. I can hear other people from other nurseries freaking out right now. That moth belongs here more than we belong here. That's why it's here. So yeah, you're gonna have them sometimes, and let it happen. Who cares? Let some nature happen in your garden. I'm really big on just like, why fight nature? Like, don't freak out and consider it a failure if you have something like this happen in your garden. And I get it. And like sometimes you work hard on growing something and then something like this happens. But think about it as more like you're given a little, right, to nature. Like we take so much from nature all the time. Why not let them have a squash plant once in a while? You'll totally live. By the way, there's nothing you can spray on this to prevent this from happening, because once the damage is done, once you see this happening, it's already in there. The only thing you can do is maybe get in there and cut it out. I've never tried doing that. I've gone in and looked for him and said, hey, I could totally cut that guy out, and then not do it. But even if you were to spray this, which you guys know we don't recommend that. It doesn't work because it's kind of like the agave weevils. Once you know they're there, the damage is done. There's not much you can do. Musk melons. The musk melons are cantaloupe and melon are the ones that but there's a mind-boggling amount of them, and they are very perfumey. In fact, some of them are grown just for that reason. Their taste is somewhat insipid, but they're so fragrant that they make the whole garden smell really good. Some of those old-fashioned, what is that called? Chanterelle, not chanterelle. It starts with a CH. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, I think they're French, of course. They are French. They're eaten. They're mild. They're not super saccharine sweet like some of those honey melons, but honeydew melons. but they smell so good, and you can put one in your house and your whole house smells good. Banana melons are really amazing and delicious, and something that no one ever, you don't really see, definitely don't see them in the supermarkets, but these are old-fashioned crops that a lot of people used to grow and don't anymore, because we got to buying stuff instead of growing them. I guess they're probably not very shelf stable or something, which is why you don't see a lot of them. Same thing as the squash in terms of growing it. Rich, improved soil. Make sure you get enough phosphorus in there. I don't think they really. I've never seen a problem with squash vine borers on muskmelons. But anyway, watermelon, totally different genus, and originally from Africa. I love watermelons. I love growing them. They're fun to grow. They take up a heck of a lot of space. I usually grow the moon and stars one that's down in the bottom left there, but I've grown a lot of other types. And this is one of those plants that people eat the fruits of, but they ignore the rinds. If you look in the old, the old Joy of Cooking, they have recipes for pickled watermelon rinds. And when I first saw that, like, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that, I was like, what, you can eat rinds? So I don't know. I love it when you can make more food out of something you've grown, because you're not wasting something that people usually waste. So eat chicken feet. They sell them at a Forbes meat company. Ben Forbes, our local butcher, he makes all the parts available. Go buy some chicken feet. That's what we're gonna do tomorrow. Pumpkins, just basically another squash, but I think they deserve their own category. I also just like to joke about there's the regular pumpkin that we all know. And then there's what I always joke during that time of the year, they show up in places like Sprouts. Actually, Safeway even had them this year, but I call them the liberal pumpkins. And that's the ones that, they're different colors or warty or, whatever. And of course, that's the ones that I buy. But yeah, they're fun. They're delicious. Pumpkin, definitely, the quintessential pumpkin, especially Cucurbit petpo, is definitely a distinct flavor from the other squashes. Super delicious, again, same. This is all going to have the same requirements as all the other cucurbits. Gourds. So gourds are also edible, most of them, when you eat them at the right time. Let me back up. Not all of them. There's the bottle gourd, the Laganarius, which it might be edible when it's green or something like that, but I don't think most people eat those. But a lot of the other gourds are, and including the luffas. I group the luffas in with these gourds because they're generally thought of plants that we grow for ornamental value, or even as a tool, like with the loofahs. I guess you scrub yourself with those. I never really understood that. Is that a lady thing?
No,
it's weird. It's a hippie thing. I just like growing loofahs because they're fun. We grow those little tiny ones. The little that little baby one that's up in the top left-hand corner there. We sold them last year too. Now, angled loofah is an edible crop that you can, if you pick it soon enough and before the inners of the loofah lignifies, which means gets woody. You can use that as an edible crop, and it's super delicious. You remove the peels and cook them. Bitter melon. We love this plant. This is not a loved plant, though. Bitter melon is bitter, like the name says, and it's an acquired taste. Although I didn't acquire it, I liked it the first time I tried it. So I don't know. I mean, this is a weirdo plant for weirdos. So if you're weird like me, you like weird flavors and bitter flavors and stuff, right? So bitter melon is super easy to grow, not as nutrient needy as a lot of the other cucurbits are. We grow it every year. There's several varieties. Every Asian nation has or every region in Asia has their own favorite heirloom variety that they use and is associated with their cuisine. Sometimes those places have more than one that they use, but super cool plant. It's a really weird plant in a lot of ways. It's a vine, so you're gonna have to grow it on something, and it's very viney, like not kind of viney like some squashes, but like super viney. So give it space. The flowers smell like gardenias. And it's funny because the foliage definitely doesn't smell like gardenias.
It smells like pepper.
Yeah, kind of peppery. Yeah, that's a good description. So yeah, the foliage has its own smell that's kind of peppery and whatever. But when they start blooming, and you'll smell it, you walk out in the morning. This is definitely, I think, meant for a nighttime pollinator. But you walk out in the morning, and it's like, whoa, what is that? Every time I forget, like, oh, it's either bitter melon or it's this other snake gourd thing that we're going to talk about too. But they both have that. They're somewhat closely related, but they both have that super gardenia like smell. So super cool. Bitter melons, you also might need to know how to cook them, and maybe that's why you haven't liked them. Some people soak them in salt, a little bit salt water, to help kind of calm down the bitterness. I like bitter as a flavor, so I really love bitter melon. But you can calm down that bitterness with some salt water. And it's so good with like bitter gourd and beef in a stir fry. God, it's so good. Especially if it's in like, Szechuan style. Yum. Here's the snake gourd. Is my video going to be in the way of the flower? Let's see. Anyway, the snake gourd is a cool plant. There's several selections of snake gourd that vary in color and length that they get. The coolest flower in the world, I'm waiting because I'm looking at the YouTube to see, because it's a little delayed. I want to okay, you can kind of see that flower. That flower is really cool. It's got fringes, and it smells like gardenias, just like the bitter melon. The texture of this vegetable is very different, and you just need to learn how to cook it. You cook it pretty fast in a stir fry. There's also lots of Indian recipes for this plant too. But wonderful plant, totally different fruit than any of the. I mean, it's similar to the bitter gourd in the type of seeds it has. It has that same kind of arrowy, orangey surrounding the seed, the kind of sticky, slimy stuff around the seeds, and very similar shaped seeds. But so you scoop that part out like you do on bitter melon. But the texture of this is totally different, and it's really fun to grow and really fun. And they get super long. Like even if you don't have a lot of nutrition in your soil, I mean, the last time we grew them, they were just there were so many of them we couldn't eat them all. Even your favorite thing, if you grow so much of it, you can only eat so much of it, and then you start to get sick of it. Learn how to trade with your neighbors, or learn how to preserve your food. There's that flower up close. So I'm glad I did that, because I got to remember when we do these YouTube things that picture's up there. Mm-hmm. Or the video. Anyway, there's that flower. How amazing is that? Wouldn't you just grow this just for the flower? It smells like gardenias and it looks like that. Why would you not grow this plant? Chayote. Now, this is another plant that I'd really like to get a hold of more varieties. the only variety we have access to is usually the one that you find in Food City, right? It's this typical chayote, and it does okay here. You can kind of make them grow, but they don't love it. But some of those other varieties actually do really well with the heat, especially those weird spiny varieties. And so, so this is something we're working on, is trying to get more access to more varieties of chayote. And there's a guy that I've talked to here and there who's down in the south somewhere, and he's like collecting varieties of chayote. This is a weird one in that if you do want to experiment with growing this, you plant that whole fruit. So the video of me is kind of in the way of the growing tip there. But if you look at that fruit on the upper right-hand corner, if you keep the fruit around long enough, you'll see that happening. A little sprout will come out and eventually some little roots. And you plant that. Don't wait too long. And you plant it about as deep as it is wide, or even a little deeper. Rich soil, but well-drained soil. It doesn't like to sit in wet, soggy soil. So, I mean, it wants moisture, but not low oxygen. So make sure that you have lots of amendments that give you enough air in there, as well as nutrients. And this plant grows really fast when you can get it going, but they can be cranky if they don't get what they want. And we'll keep working on trying to find access to these ourselves, so that we can make them available to you, or be on the lookout. Look on eBay. eBay is actually a really good place to get cool seeds, or in this case, you'd want to get a hold of that whole fruit, and to plant them, or hit the Asian markets, and maybe at some point those international markets will bring in, because Asian markets don't just sell Asian stuff, right? They sell stuff from all over the world, and so sometimes they make stuff like this available. But super cool. It's a stir fry vegetable basically. This is a cool plant that actually that people think are two different crops. There is the fuzzy melon and the wax melon. If you go into Grantstone Market, even today, probably you'll find both. Excuse me. So when the fruits of this plant are young, they're fuzzy, which really prickly is more of a word. They're kind of, the hairs are kind of irritating. So it's kind of a little bit of annoying to pick this fruit. You shave off the outer prickly part when you eat it as a fuzzy melon. But if you leave it on the vine for a long time, it eventually turns into this wax melon, which can store forever. And there's different varieties grow into different sizes. Some of them are the size of giant watermelons, and they're super waxy on the outside. You can actually scrape off wax on the outside. It's wax, which is what helps it store for so long. This is a very Asian, very Chinese crop, and considered like all of the greatest cuisines out there. It came from poverty. And because it's easy to grow, it's very prolific, and it stores well. Really cool heritage crop. The flesh of both of them are just like a lot of cucurbits. I wouldn't call it something to write home about. It's more how you flavor it. It's more of a thing that holds flavor rather than something that has a lot of its own flavor, but just cool to grow. Jelly melon. So this is an African species, and it's gotten popular in the last 5-10 years. Baker's Creek has been making seeds available. Very tropical. Started as soon as you can. Started inside or in a greenhouse if you can, and get it out and protect it from frost. It is not very tolerant of frost. Lots of nutrients, really good drainage, and yeah, it's just a weird sort of, it's a little bit of a novelty. It's not the funnest thing in the world to eat, but it's fun. It's fun to grow. It's weird looking. Yeah. The mallows. So the Malvaceae, okra is a mallow, and related to hibiscus. And a lot of people, if you've never grown it before, you might not know that it has the same damn flowers a hibiscus has. So the entire plant's edible, and that's true of pretty much all mallows. Mallows are super edible. The foliage is edible. The fruits are edible. Most mallows have the tendency to be mucilaginous, like the famous texture of the okra. And so there are, of course, ways to cook it to tone down that mucilaginous aspect of the food. But a lot of countries actually want that quality in the food because it's very good for your guts. And it has some nutritional qualities that come along with that mucilaginous texture. So anyway, okra is a pretty cool plant, and up in the top there, the red one there, that's actually another species of Abelmotius. That's a genus of okra. And that one produces a tiny little okra-like pod as well, and the whole plant's edible. And we've even sold some of those this year, last summer. So anyway, and some people do try to make. I did it once, and I'm going to be honest, it sucked. But I made the okra coffee. So like okra, the pod dries and then has those dark hard seeds, and I roasted them and I made them into a coffee substitute, and it tasted terrible. And maybe if you add it to coffee, like they do chicory, maybe it can be interesting. Or maybe I didn't do it right. Maybe I didn't do it right.
Maybe. I still think it'd be awful.
Yeah, it's kind of like why replace the real thing? Maybe if you can make it its own food, but I don't know. I'm gonna play around with that. Maybe I'm just using it wrong. But anyway, I mean, the reason that we started adding chicory to coffee was because of the world wars, and there was the shortage, and the people want their coffee, and so that's why they did the chicory coffee thing, and that's probably why they did the okra coffee thing too. So maybe we don't need to do that. Roselle. Oh, why are these pictures messed up? Okay, well, it's not a picture of roselle. Roselle, I don't have a picture of it there. Problem with the slides, but roselle is a hibiscus, and we've sold it, and it's also jamaica. If you know jamaica, like in the Mexican restaurants, that red drink that's
or hibiscus tea.
Or hibiscus tea, they call it too. That is all from jamaica or roselle, and it's the calyxes of the fruits or flowers that are on the outside that you use to make that tea. But the whole plant's edible. And by the way, every plant in this family is also great for tortoises. Tortoises really love mallows. They'll just mow them right down. The roselle grows into quite a giant shrub, but it's almost always annual. It doesn't usually come back, but it produces so much seed. I mean, like gobs and gobs of seed. So you really don't have to, if you can grow something from seed, then you'll have it every year. But super cool crop to grow, really easy, not needy in nutrients. None of these mallows are very needy, especially when you're not growing them for the fruit. The okra takes a little bit more nutrition than the roselle, or the what else did we talk about? Oh, that's it. Yeah, all the other mallows are quite easy to grow. In fact, the weedy mallow that comes up in your yard, which is Malva neglecta, I think, or there's another one, but there's two of them that are like that. But it's a winter mallow. That's a funny thing too, that most of the ones that we eat of the mallows are summer growers, but there's that weedy one that comes up in the winter time. That's also edible. I don't know how good it is. If you pick them really young, you got to know how to cook them. Actually, I am going to experiment because there's another crop called Malokia. It's a perennial crop, really, and I didn't put it in this slideshow. I don't think I might have. I might have put it under greens, um, but the Malokia is an African crop that people grow for the leaves, and I did learn how to cook that and make that into this delicious African dish. And so you could probably do the same thing with that weedy mallow. Let's try that. But you could do all the hibiscuses, even the hibiscus, that everyone grows, that red flowered Rosa sinensis is edible, and you can eat that. If you get it from a regular nursery, don't eat it because they spray it with awful things. But if you get it from someone who does things organically, who would that be? Then you can eat it. Or if you have it for a while, and hopefully the systemic for the pesticides have left it after a while. Anyway, the warm season herbs. Okay, so we have winter season herbs like cilantro and dill and parsley and chervil, right? That's what we're growing now, maybe. And then there's the warm season herbs. Now, we're not going to talk about too many perennials because, again, it's another class and another subject. But the typical ones like basil, and again, basil comes in a mind-boggling amount of varieties. Start looking for them. We've sold a lot of varieties of basil over the last few years, like the Tulsi there. That's what's the other name for Tulsi basil? The holy basil. Super unique flavors that you can play around with, and really easy to grow. Basils, by the way, can perennialize if you protect them from frost. So I know I just said we weren't talking about perennials, but actually a lot of these annuals that we grow are really perennials, but you have to protect them if you want them to continue. I know people in Tucson, even, and definitely in Phoenix, but even in Tucson, who have basil plants that are like shrubs and they've been around for years. That can happen if you have that right spot for them. Anyway, there's a countless amount of basils. One that is a little bit more dependably perennial is what they call African basil. I don't know why they call it African basil, and I'm beginning to think that's a racist kind of thing because it's not from Africa. it's a hybrid, and it's a really cool one. It's do I have a picture of it there? I don't have a picture of it in there, but if you we sell this every year. It doesn't produce from seed, so you can't buy seed. You have to buy plant, but it's more dependably perennial because it's a little bit more frost resistant and more likely to keep growing and coming back from the base. But all basils can do that. Just some of them are more likely to do that than others. The big lettuce leaf basils, those are not going to be as long lived as some of the other types that are shrubbier, because those lettuce leaf basils are so overbred. They're not bred to live long, kind of like English bulldogs. We're terrible. Epazote used to be an artemisia. They just changed it to dysphaenia. But this is a magical herb that more people should grow and add into their cuisine. It's got an amazing flavor and it keeps you from farting. This is the thing, supposedly. I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to believe it. Epazote, if you cook it with especially black beans, but I think any beans, is supposed to decrease flatulence. It's really good too. This herb, that's all we know about it in America, but in especially Mexican and South American cuisine, they use it as an herb all the time. It's really good with huitlacoche. So start using it for other things besides. Well, most people don't use it at all, but it's more for just not. It's not just an anti-farting herb. Very weedy, easy to grow, doesn't need rich soil. Even moisture. It doesn't mind rich soil. Actually, plants that are in amended soil do great. This will come up every year. Once you plant it, you got it. It'll come up on its own. Shiso, one of my favorite of the mint family, and super fun plant to grow, and endless things you can do with it. It's more for than just wrapping sushi up or as a garnish for sushi. I was just reading today in this book that we just got, the Book of Greens. Highly recommend this book. It's a Portland chef, a James Beard award-winning chef. There's a recipe in here for shiso butter. I am so gonna try that. It's just one of those things. Like all these crops, like I've been growing a lot of these crops for about 30 years, and I haven't always dove into each crop, and sometimes I've just grown them and using them for whatever I use them for, or sometimes I've just grown because I'm a nerd and I like to grow things. I'm over the years I keep finding new stuff that I didn't know about these crops because they come from somewhere else, right? And sometimes they come from cultures that we don't know a lot about, and then you start reading more and learning more about that culture and their food, and you learn, oh, they ferment this thing, or oh, they use it in this way, and you end up getting more versatility out of each crop when you bother to learn more about where it comes from and what it's used for. So shiso is like that. A lot of people think it's just like a garnish for sushi because that's our experience with it, but it has a whole lot of uses and unique flavor. Something in the middle of, it's like cross between basil and mint, and something else. I don't know, something green tasting. There's generally two types. There's the Japanese variety that's more that frayed leaf, the bigger picture there. That's the more common one, and that comes in reds and greens. And then there's the what they call the Korean shiso, which is that larger heart-shaped almost leaf, and that also comes in reds and greens. Or there's a variety I grow every year that has purple on the bottom and green on the top, super pretty. I've made syrups out of it before, and they impart some color into the syrup as well as an amazing flavor, and of course used in cocktails because that's what I do with everything. Stevia, sugar substitute, is what this plant is known for, but it's an herb. It has its own flavor. It's very sweet. You can make syrups out of it. You can play around with this flavor and use it for more than just a sugar substitute. I'm keep finding this out about foods like tofu. Tofu is an amazing ingredient that we always think of as in the West as like, oh, it's a vegetarian food. In China, like most tofu dishes have meat in them too. It's not a meat substitute. It's its own ingredient. And it's going to only depress you if you just pretend like it's a meat and eat it. Eat it for its own sake. Learn how people use stuff, where these crops are from. Read cookbooks and we have the world at our fingertips with the internet. You can always look this stuff up. But you also start to learn as you start using all these crops. You start to see patterns like, oh, there's certain things you can make syrups out of. There's certain things you can make greens out of it. These patterns start repeating themselves, and you can apply sometimes these patterns to crops that haven't been done before and do something new. That happens too. Use this herb is more than just a sugar substitute. A lot of people grow this just as a novelty because it's like, wow, it's a cool plant that has a really sweet leaf. Super tropical. And easy to grow. It's kind of weedy. Oh, we have our own native species of stevia, by the way. Mount Lemmon alone, I think, has 2 or 3 species in the Catalinas, and they're sweet. They have a sweet flavor to them. So how cool is that, right? So not just this South American species, but try to grow those native ones. We're working on it, making them available. But yeah, there's at least 3 species I think that are in the Catalinas. Definitely 2. Summer savory. I'm not going to talk about winter savory because that's a perennial. But also, winter savory kind of sucks compared to the summer savory. Summer savory is the really delicious one, and it's used kind of like sage, but it doesn't. It has its own flavor. I would say it's even. I mean, it's got some oregano kind of to the flavor, and a little bit of a peppery thing going on. It's used in Canada a lot, for pork dishes. This is a fun herb to grow. It'll definitely drive you to recipes you haven't seen before. We sell this right now even. It's definitely annual. It kind of can reseed, but it's best to get a new one every year because not to depend on it to reseed, because I've had it come up maybe once or twice, but not very often. Also cute little flowers that it gets when it blooms. A lot of these, almost all these are in the mint family, not all of them, but but basil and the shiso and the savory, when they start to flower, you do want to snip back the flowers, but it's not like cilantro where if it goes to flower, that's it, because these are a little bit more perennial. And cilantro is not a perennial. It's when it blooms, it's gone. But what people think is if they prune back the flowers, that the plant will bush out more. That's only true to a certain extent. What they really need is food. Give them a little bit of food and prune back the flowers. Don't just depend on pruning back the flowers to keep the plants bushy. I say that especially for containered plants, and that's where people love to grow herbs. They love to grow them in containers, but grow them in the biggest container possible, and you'll have less of a problem with that. But anyway, a lot of these, thyme and mints and all that stuff, they need food, and so pruning back the flowers is not enough. The warm greens. So we're just going to run through this because we kind of talked about some of them already. But amaranth, this is also a grain crop, by the way. And we're going to only touch on grains very quickly because they're not very, they're fun to grow, to know more about grains, but you can't really grow enough grain to make a loaf of bread in your backyard. It's just not enough room. So, because you have to grow lots and lots of one plant to make a little bit of flour, or whatever you're doing with the grain. That isn't to say that you couldn't enjoy, like amaranth seeds. You can also kind of pop on a stove top and eat them that way, and that's kind of fun. So you can play around with some, with their seeds too. But when they're young. You eat the greens. You want to eat them when they're young and tender. When the plants get really big, especially when they're flowering, the leaves are not very. They're really fibrous. Now you could play around with fermenting them, and that's actually something I have not tried with amaranth greens, but it's worth a try. And anytime you have a green that's a little too rough or tough, too fibrous, fermenting is a great method of rendering the greens more edible because it softens them up. You get acids. But anyway, this is one of your summer greens. Very, very tropical, easy to grow, weedy. Doesn't particularly need a lot of nutrients. If you're going to grow it as a grain crop, you might feed it a bit more, quite a bit more actually. But as a green crop, it doesn't need that much. Malabar spinach is a lovely crop, and I love this plant. It's a vine. It's a weird plant. It's in its own weird family, and it has these very succulent leaves. And you can't really tell in the picture, but it's almost a succulent. It really kind of is a succulent. This is one you're going to barely cook. You just coconut milk is really a good one pairing with this, and then maybe some like Indian spices, and just very quickly wilt them, and because they get mucilaginous if you cook them for too long. And I know it's not a mallow, but they do get mucilaginous. And there's a red and a green variety. The red one is red stemmed. The leaves are just a little bit darker. They're not really red leaves. But anyway, it's a delicious, easy to grow crop. Does want some nutrition, garden soil, but it's and it's a vine, so give it something to grow on. Vertilagus, portulaca. This is one that might come up in your yard as a volunteer. There's also horse purslane, and horse purslane looks a lot like regular purslane. So if it came up and you didn't plant it, learn the difference. Horse purslane is not as good. That's why they call it horse purslane. It's like it's better for the horses. Whereas vertilagus are really delicious and succulent and not so fibery. And they're also pretty. They make pretty flowers, and a lot of portulacas are grown for their flowers. Again, something you don't want to overcook. You can eat these raw too. If you buy ornamental varieties, know where they came from, because you want to talk about pesticides. Ornamental plants, there's very few rules in what you can spray on a plant, and some of those things that they spray on ornamental plants, especially those horticultural crops that are available from California, they're just loaded with pesticides. So don't eat them if you don't know where they came from, but you can grow them from seed. If portulaca even hears about winter, if it even hears about it, it's gone. It is not tolerant of frost at all. It's not even tolerant of the idea of frost. So very summer crop. You wouldn't plant these yet. I would definitely wait till April to plant this. They don't have any problem with summer. And sort of talked about it, but greens. A lot of things are edible as a leaf, and we don't know that. Like on the top left-hand corner, those are fava bean leaves, and they're edible and they're delicious. That red hibiscus is a super delicious green. Cook fast, don't cook it too long, it'll get mucilaginous, but super delicious and pretty too. And then we talked about sweet potato greens. And I do have a picture of Malokia. Down in the bottom left-hand corner is that Egyptian or African plant that's it's one of those plants they think is going to save the world. It's got a really great nutritional profile. It's an arid land crop. It's really easy to grow. It doesn't look like it's going to be a weed problem, at least here. And it's delicious. And we made some really great dishes out of that plant that we'll probably share on our social media or something sometime soon. There's a picture of a fava bean. Oh, let me back up here. I said fava bean. That's a garbanzo bean. No, that's a fava bean. Yeah. And there's another fava bean there too. So fava bean leaves are edible and they're super good. Squash leaves, and of course squash blossoms. You probably know that. The daisy family. There's only a couple of these. Artichoke and cardoon. You probably know what an artichoke is. You might not know what a cardoon is. A cardoon looks just like an artichoke, but you don't. It's not grown for the flower bud, although the flower bud on the cardoon is edible. It's just not as big as the artichoke. Which, by the way, if you didn't know that, the artichoke is a flower bud before the flower opens up. You can see the flower on the top left there, blooming away. So that's too late to eat. Long before that happens, when it looks like an artichoke, like you'll see that there's some swelling down in those bracts. That's when you pick it. That's the artichoke, right? So the cardoon has an edible flower bud, but you eat the stems too. It has a swollen stem, and you can see the plants in the middle top there. It almost looks like celery, and that's what they look like. If you've been to Europe and you go to the market in Europe, you see them there all the time. You probably thought it was some kind of weird inedible celery plant, or maybe you thought it was what do they call that? Rutabaga, not rutabaga. The sweet thing you eat, and rhubarb. It looks like rhubarb almost, but you got to cook it right. If you don't cook it right, it tastes terrible. And it's a trick. You got to do it right. We've cooked it before and it's been awful, but we've cooked it before and it's been good too. So learn how to cook it right. Read the recipes and do what the recipes say. Don't be too creative with the timing. But anyway, we're actually growing some of these right now to sell, and they might be ready in about a week or so as little 4-inch pots. Very cool plant. Cardoon's great, and a lot more edible stuff. And by the way, the flavor is like an artichoke heart. So it's like the heart of the artichoke. It's got that Sinara flavor that I love so much because it's bitter. Sunchokes, Helianthus tuberosus, sometimes called Jerusalem artichoke. Again, many varieties of this available besides the one in the grocery store. But if you want to plant a grocery store one, it's really easy. You see them sometimes, not often, but like at co-ops and stuff, they sell sunchokes. Now, the thing about sunchokes, so by the way, it's a tuber, you put it in the ground, and moderately rich soil, and it grows fast, and you'll get lots of tubers. You also get lots of flowers that are nectar rich, that are really good for wildlife, and it produces seeds that the finches are going to be all over. But it's when you cook these, you want to do something like fermenting them first, because they also are known as fartichokes. And I know I'm talking about farting a lot, but I guess I just talk about farting a lot. They call them Jerusalem fartichokes instead of Jerusalem artichokes, because they will give you gas. Woo! And not stinky gas, but just like a lot of gas. You'll fart all night long. And sometimes it even, like the last time we ate them, not the last time, but the last time we ate them the wrong way, my stomach even kind of hurt. There's because so much fart in my
so much gas.
So much. So if you ferment them, there's recipes in the internet for that first, and then you cook them. Then they are much more pleasant to eat. And I love the flavor of sunchokes. They're delicious. They have their own nutty kind of flavor, very earthy but nutty. So yeah, the fartichokes. Sunflowers. I think people who love life grow sunflowers. If you grow sunflowers, you just love life, because they're just beautiful. They are useful too, although they're kind of a lot of work to pull all the seeds out and roast them and whatever. They're a bit of work. I don't grow them for me. I grow them for the birds. And I grow them for me too, because they're pretty and they make me smile, and they're giant flowers, and grow the big ones. Why don't grow those stupid little dwarf species? Why bother? Like, grow the ones that grow like 9 feet tall. Those are fun, and they are great for wildlife, and people with souls in their bodies will enjoy them. There's some people who hate sunflowers, and they're soulless people, and I don't know what's wrong with them. But I love sunflowers, and I grow them for the birds mostly, and because I have a soul. Legumes, very quick, because this class is. I used to teach all the vegetables and herbs in one class, and now you see why I don't, because this is just a warm season, and we are. I'm even watering a lot of stuff down. Most beans are warm season crops. There's a few that are not. Lentils, fava beans, garbanzos are the ones that I can think of at the moment, are cool season crops. Most of the other beans are warm season crops. They're summer growers. They don't want a nitrogen rich soil. So if you have a cruddy soil and you just grew let's say you just grew in your one bed, you grew a bunch of Brussels sprouts and cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower, right? And now the swarm season's coming. Uh, you could do a crop of beans, and if you didn't want to, amend it all and add a lot of stuff to the soil. Beans fix nitrogen in the soil. They don't want rich stuff in the ground. Um, they do want a little bit of phosphorus, but and so you can add, and you can feed them with organic fertilizer. Don't be afraid to do that. Organic fertilizers are usually, sober amounts of all those nutrients. But they don't really need a lot of love. They take care of themselves. Good drainage is important with legumes. Obviously, you got to have them growing on something. Most beans are vines. There are bush beans that are bushy and don't require something to grow on. Make sure you don't shade out your other crops, by the way. If you're growing a bunch of beans or squash or cucumbers and you have to put them up somewhere, make sure it's not going to shade out something else you're growing. But anyway, and almost all the beans have edible leaves. So, we've talked about that. Pretty flowers, by the way. Almost all the beans have real pretty flowers. Fenugreek is an herb that if you're into Indian food, you're probably going to come across. We don't use it in the West so much, but very important to Indian food. And I think, the foliage is also edible on this one as well. I haven't eaten fenugreek leaves, but I'm curious about them. They have those little beans that you eat have a very pungent flavor, and anyway, it's you're gonna have to look up recipes to learn how to use fenugreek. I've only used it a little bit in curries and stuff. We have some at the house here, but it's easy to grow, and it likes our summer heat. It's just needs some even moisture, and it's a legume, so it doesn't need a super rich soil. Jicama, I've only tried growing this a couple of times, and with mixed results. It needs a really long growing season, and there's different varieties of this too. The one in the store, you're not going to be able to get that same kind of jicama. The one I grew is a smaller one. It was still delicious. In fact, I almost liked the flavor of it more than the big ones. But it's quite a bit of a different crop than those giant ones. Kitazawa Seed Company sells jicama. I think there's another Asian seed company that sells them too. Here's a good example of a tropical American crop that I think it's tropical. I'm pretty sure it's a tropical American native, and but the Asian seed companies are the ones that are making it available. So it's kind of interesting. That happens a lot. They do make jicama makes beans that I don't know if they're edible. I think they are, but I haven't tried them. Peanuts, a weird legume. So the flowers get fertilized above ground, and then they plunge down into the ground and create the peanut. Weird, right? Such a fascinating botanical curiosity. You should grow it just for that. The main thing about this plant, obviously being a legume, it doesn't really need a lot of super rich soil, but what it does need is loosened soil. If you have if you let the ground be too hard around it, it's not going to do a good job of plunging those peanuts into the ground. So just be aware of that. You can buy, and again, more varieties of peanuts are available when you grow them than are available. It's actually one kind of peanut that's ever available. Well, no, two: the Spanish peanuts and then the typical peanut. But there's like purple peanuts, and there's all kinds of peanuts out there, and worth looking into. We've got seed of purple peanuts, not something, by the way, you'll find in a nursery. And none of these legumes are not good nursery container plants. And if you see them sold in a container, don't buy it. It's a waste of money. You just buy the seed and learn how to plant seeds, because legumes are not easily grown from a container. The grass family are going to be mostly grains that are too space needy for a backyard garden, but grow them for fun, also for the birds. Be careful, you don't want to introduce weeds. I mean, most of these plants are already in our flora, but they only really take over and disturb soils. They don't really cause that much problem in the wild. These plants come up in your yard probably anyway. If you have a bird feeder, yeah, they come up around the bird feeder. And I think it's interesting to know what a barley plant looks like, or know what teff looks like, or oats. Like, what does it look like? You should know that. You should have more contact with this stuff that we depend on every single day. Corn, on the other hand, is something you can grow in your backyard and get something fun out of it. It still takes up a lot of space, but you're not trying to make a loaf of bread out of it. And most people probably want to grow the sweet corn. You want to start corn as soon as you can. Protect it from frost, and feed it. The corn is a heavy feeder. And if you're lucky, you get that corn smut or wheat la coche. Most people, when they see it, they don't know anything about it, they think it's some kind of disease, and I guess technically it is, but it's a delicious disease. Wheat la coche is a fungus, and it has a beautiful mushroomy flavor, and if you grow a bunch of corn, you're going to get it. They show up almost every time I grow corn, and they'll show up on most types of corn, not just sweet corn. Yeah, grow corn because it's fun. You grow that weird glass gem corn just because it's pretty. You don't have to actually use it. And there's a lot to say about corn, and there's not enough time to go over it all. But in general, there's several different types of corn. There's most of the ones that we're going to encounter in the backyard are going to be sweet corn, or they're going to be a corn that you make masa or something like that out of. Or you're going to grow teosinte because you want to grow the early corns that just because you're interested in history, right? Of course you are. Teosinte is the original. There's a picture of one on the left there in the middle. That's a primitive corn. I've grown it because it's fun. But once you start looking into it, there's so many weird corns out there. Obviously, our whole entire economy is based off of feeding cows on corn, and also biofuel. There are varieties of corn that are just made for, industrial uses. Not my favorite kind of corn to grow, but there are very many amazing heirloom corns, and they're worth the time. Sorghum might come up in your yard without you even planting it because of bird seed, and you can make it. I put this in here. This is not really something that's convenient to grow, but if you happen to be able to press them and get the sweetness out of the sorghum, it's pretty great. You can even just kind of chomp on the plant to get that sweetness out of it. The grain, you can pan cook those and roast them, and they're delicious. So there's that use too. But in terms of getting that sugary substance that you get from sorghum, you need a press, which is kind of hard to get. And that's the same for sugarcane, which a lot of people grow. Now, sugarcane is perennial, and people in Tucson and Phoenix grow sugarcane all the time. It's just a fun thing to grow. I grow this because it's fun, not because I'm actually going to make sugar or whatever, molasses. But it's fun. It's fun to grow stuff. And that's it for the slideshow. And then the only thing I'm going to do now is just share some books for further information, because I think you should know. Is now the problem with books on this subject, and by the way, so you can start firing your questions at us. I see that Katie's been managing some already. On the subject of books, be very aware that literature that is not from Arizona or the Southwest is going to be problematic, because we have an entirely different growing season and different challenges to our soil. So you don't want to depend on them for information, but you can get general information out of them, like what kind of nutrition does the tomato plant like, and good ideas for tying up your squash vines or something like that. But there are some local books out there. There's this funny, the garden guy, he's got a couple of books, and this one's more of the seasonal guidelines, and he tells you, during different times of the year, when to do what. And he's pretty organic too. So he's also, one of these personalities too. So anyone who puts their picture on the cover. But I got his books at Antigone. So they're available there, and they're available at local places. In fact, I try to get all my books at Antigone or the book stop if they're older. There's several of these local month-by-month guides out there. This particular one's from Mary Irish, who is Desert Botanical Gardens. And this has ornamental plants in it too, but has some good seasonal guidelines for vegetables and when to plant them and stuff. And this is not a local book, but I like it because it's got good information on what pH range. It's a little bit more technical. It has some pH range on the soil. Tells you the nutrient requirements for each crop, and it has some just general good guidelines. So I kind of like this book. It even has hints at like telling when something is right. It's kind of nice. I love this book for the Asian vegetables. It's super technical and nerdy, but not too technical. Like you'll understand what they're talking about. And it covers all kinds of really cool, interesting crops, including all those weird gingers that the Asians use that we don't even get, but you can find on eBay. There's an old school book. I don't really use it very often. This is an old school, not organic. And this guy, he was an old writer, Tucson writer. He wrote for the Arizona Daily Star or something, Brookbank. He's since passed on. He fights nature. But there's some good information and there's seasonal information and stuff. I also think it's good to read up and learn about preserving vegetables and different ideas for doing that. And that's half of gardening. It's half. Maybe it's more than half is using the crops, right? Why are you growing vegetables if you're not going to use them? So it's been very important in my life because I was not a food person, and I became a food person because I was a plant person. I grew tomatoes and it drove me into the kitchen. So the gardens always drive me into the kitchen. And I'm combing through cookbooks and books like this, like books that are just about ideas for preserving foods, whether it's dehydration or fermentation, canning, and all that. I think those are skills that everyone should know. And if you get more into it, this is the Bible, Sandra Katz, and another Bible, the Noma Guide to Fermentation. These are excellent books that'll help you preserve your harvest. And just two more books, and I promise I'll be done. The Bar Tartine is a great cookbook, but it's very good at telling you how to make spice powders. Do you know how to do that? You know, that's something that you all depend on every day. Do you know how to make a spice powder? They tell you how to do it in here. Really nice pickling recipes in here. A little bit of fermentation, but it's less, you know, those other books are better for fermentation. This is more kitchen preservation methods and just great recipes. And then finally, you should know science and you should know about food. So of course, a science book on food. This is a fantastic, lovely book. And Harold McGee, he's one of the best. I read this I'm always going in this book. And I mean, he talks about the chemical qualities of these crops and like why we use them in sauces the way we do, or why do we what's rennet, and there's rennet that makes cheese, and are there vegetables that do that too? Like that stuff's in here. Learning, you know, the science behind food is going to help you become a better gardener, because you're actually going to bother doing the right thing to grow those crops because you're using them actually. So I promise that was the last book, right? But we did just get this one. It's really good. You should get it. It's super good. All right. Anyone else have questions? Because I have to wait a minute because of the delay. But if you have questions, let me know. Let us know.
Is there a benefit to? Someone was asking where to source Jerusalem artichokes in Tucson, and I said go to the co-op, Whole Foods or Sprouts. Mm-hmm. But it does look like you can order them from seed companies.
Yeah, you can. So you get the tubers. And I can tell you Southwest, there's a Southern Seeds of the Southwest. What is that one?
I didn't see that one.
There's a cookbook from the South. Actually, we'll post a do South. We're trying to see Southern Exposure Seed Company offers different, has in the past anyways, offered different sunchoke varieties, including some of those cool purple ones. So you might hit them up. There's a few other of those heirloom seed companies that offer that, but yeah, Southern Exposure is pretty good. And it's a Southern latitude seed company, so they have a lot of stuff in there that's good for us. Any other questions that people ask that publicly answered would be good?
Let's see. You mentioned that squash can handle and even benefit from some shade. Are there any other veggies that's true for?
So the cucurbits as a group, I'm always a little reticent to suggest too much shade because people get a little too crazy about that, but they can benefit from shade. The cucurbits benefit from some shade. Don't give them too much shade because then you're going to sacrifice flowering. Plants need sun to make those beautiful flowers and fruits. So, but a little bit of a break is what we're talking about when we say that. But as far as the other crop, yeah, like mostly just the cucurbits. Tomatoes actually, not tomatoes, peppers. I've seen peppers fruit well in fairly shady spots sometimes, but I've also seen the opposite. I've seen them too shaded and they're not producing well. So err on the side of sun. The sun problems that happen are mostly cosmetic, and also they happen when the plant's not really producing anyway, right? So like tomatoes, when it gets really hot, it doesn't matter if you shade it more, it ain't gonna fruit better for you. So it's not the sun that's the problem, it's the heat. So that's almost always the case. So just we only added a little bit of a break just to take the heat off the plant so there's not so much transpiration. That was like 30%. That's not a lot of shade. So when you buy shade cloth, look for like something like 30% or 40% at the most. Some people do more, and they're great gardeners. It's just in my experience, if you go more than 50% shade, you start to really sacrifice what you're growing the crop for.
Somebody asked if you know of a dwarf citrus that can be grown in a container along a south-facing wall.
So, so the south wall is. I'm gonna assume that there's no shade involved here. When people say south wall, they usually mean reflected heat. So any citrus can grow there, but they might not look that great. The bigger the container, the better. But you can grow any. There's no dwarf citrus that's going to be better than another one in that situation. So you can grow any of them in that situation, but you're going to have to do some things to make it easier on that plant. Remember, it's already hard in a container, right? So if you also have the reflected heat, then you're making it a little harder on that plant than it might need to be. So if there's some way you can shade the container a little bit, block the sun from hitting the container, that'll be nice. You'll need to feed regularly in the container, organic. And every time I say, when I'm talking about feeding, by the way, I'm always talking about organic, always. When you feed synthetic fertilizers, there's a whole bunch of things that sometimes you should do this. And that's because it's intense. Like you can burn your plants with synthetic fertilizers. Organic fertilizers don't burn your plants that way because they have to be broken down in the soil first. There are a few that can, like blood meal is very high in nitrogen. And if it's in the middle of summer, you can burn your plant with blood meal. So look at the numbers. The numbers should be low. And if you have low numbers, you can feed very consistent. You can feed like as I'm telling you with any of these things. But make sure your plants are well fed. Obviously, you're gonna have to water that plant a lot in the summertime, okay? Because it's hot, and containers dry out way quicker than the ground. You will have some leaf scorch, and that is something that all citrus get if they're planted in the right place. You need sun for citrus because they need sun, and citrus just naturally get this yellowing on the top. It's sunburn. And that's because we live in a pretty intense climate. But it even happens in California too. It's not just Arizona thing. And it's natural, especially grapefruits, by the way. Grapefruits have a bigger leaf, so they're going to have a lot more of that scorch on the top. But as far as any particular variety of citrus going to be doing better in the heat against that south wall, the only thing I could say is a smaller leafed variety will look better, but it won't necessarily fruit better. And the fruiting isn't going to be impeded by the heat, by the way. So you don't have to worry about that. It's just you'll have more of that leaf scorch with the bigger leafed citrus.
Somebody's interested in Tony's magic mix. What makes it so magical? And will it be back in stock soon?
Is it out of stock already?
I will have to.
We just put it online.
I didn't think we sold it all.
We might still have some, and we'll check on that. But it's all organic. It's a really good blend. The blend he made is, he's the guy who makes it is a local guy who knows our local soil and knows about the alkalinity. So not all organic foods are the same. There's a lot of organic foods out there that are not quite as good for our soils because they get locked up in alkalinity. Okay, our soil is very alkaline. Our water is alkaline. So he's put stuff in his food that take that into consideration. The other thing he put in there is the magnesium. And magnesium is like it's just one of those things. It's something that runs out a lot, and when it runs out, then plants don't do so well, or they just get stagnant. So the magnesium is kind of one of those magic ingredients in there. It also has mycorrhizae in there. So that's another one of the ingredients in it. Everybody loves that mix. It's we're not new to introducing this to town. Magic Garden, I think, sells it. He's been around town for a while, but it's just made for here. So that's, and things that are made by people who live in your area are going to know a lot more about what you're dealing with than some guy in Oregon who's making something that works well with his acid soil. You know what I mean?
And if we don't have it in stock, we will have it again soon.
Yeah, if we don't have it in stock, if we ran out, we will have it soon.
Maybe in the next week.
Yeah, we can get it. Yeah, we can get more.
I think that's it.
Okay, I'm gonna wait just another minute, but I think we're done. I'm gonna have a sip. You want to say anything, Kay? Hey, look at this, Kay.
What?
Nothing. I'm just drinking.
Oh, okay.
Looks like we're good. All right. Thanks, guys, for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I hope you all learned something. I get a little long-winded sometimes, and I hope I don't lose anyone when I do that. But yeah, this is my favorite subject, though. I love cooking. I love food. I love eating my plants. So.
Oh wait.
Oh, we got a question.
Okay. The 5-pound bucket. How long will that go?
It depends on what you're feeding, but
I think you use what 4 cups to 10
square feet.
10 square feet.
4 cups to 10 square feet. So it's a 5-pound bucket. So so that kind of gives you an idea. And it just depends on what you're feeding. I don't know, and as far as containers, I guess just like I would say like a 1/4 cup, maybe.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, so depends on what you're feeding, how long it'll go for, but
gotten good vegetation growth, but very little fruit on tomatoes, no chilies till month 5 or 6, no tomatillos.
Okay, so someone said that they're not getting fruit, they're getting a bunch of foliage. Is that what I'm seeing?
Yeah.
On tomatillos on tomatillos, it might be that you didn't have more than one. So if that was the case, that's why you probably didn't get any fruit. If it's but you said it's peppers and tomatoes too, is that true?
And squash and melon.
So you need phosphorus. It happens a lot, especially if you've been gardening in a plot for a little while. You got to replace that stuff. So the middle number on your fertilizer, right? It doesn't have to be 20. You don't want it to be 20. That's probably not a organic fertilizer. But just something like 2 or 3 or 5, but 5 is a good number on any organic fertilizer, really. But you need phosphorus, and you might be a little bit, you might have some alkalinity going on too. So just some compost. Add a good amount of compost. If it's your own compost, it's always better. But some nice rich compost. That mushroom compost is pretty good stuff. I kind of like that stuff. And then again, an organic fertilizer with a middle number. We have that citrus fertilizer too that we sell. That would be really good for that. And that also has a whole bunch of micronutrients, including magnesium too. So if we're out of the Tony's Magic Mix or whatever we call it, it's Tony's Magic Mix.
I think so.
Yeah. Then get that one. It's fine.
And yes, our COVID procedures are still in effect.
We're strict about that.
All online, curbside pickup Friday through Sunday, 10 to 5. No visitors yet. The
reason a lot of people are like, oh, you're outside in your nursery. Number one, I think being outside is a false sense of security. Number two, we're small. We're like a tiny nursery. And also we've been so busy that we're not even very, I mean, it's a mess back there. So like, I don't know what we're going to do when we do open up again, but I mean, we just have to be creative about our space. But yeah, but the biggest thing is just like, we have a wide variety of people that go to our nursery, young and older, and and I just don't want to kill anyone's grandmother or something, so like, they're not going to get COVID at Spadefoot. We are considering scheduling visitors at some point.
At some point. Yeah.
Not soon.
And yes, tomatillos should be grown in multiples.
Yes.
Should do two to three.
Yeah, 2 to 3 tomatillos is ideal.
I think that's it. Yeah, we're looking forward to when we can be open again and let everyone in.
Yeah, and it's all this COVID procedure stuff is a lot of work for us. So I can't wait to be normal again too.
Or whatever that
means. I don't think we'll be normal ever again. I think we're always going to keep the online thing for anyone who wants to protect themselves for a long time, because COVID's going to change, and these diseases don't always come. They never come in one. The pandemics always come in. Sorry about that, guys. Not looking forward to that. Anyway, sorry. It was depressing.
Let's go drink more.
Let's go to bed. We got to get up in the morning. Thank you. And I hope and sorry about, there were some problems with the slides and stuff this time, and I hope you got something out of the class.
Yeah. So thanks, guys.